Hello, welcome to my video, which is a kind of introduction video before my videos about Chopin's sonatas, Chopin's piano sonatas, which I'm going to make soon. I decided to dedicate one short video in which I'm going to explain to you the architecture of the sonata form. Sonata form, which is a kind of way of constructing the piece, which in my opinion is very important to know how it should be constructed, so that we can freely talk about Chopin's sonatas, because Chopin definitely respected the tradition. And that's why today I want to talk about this, and I promise you not to use musical terms, I promise you not to use very difficult language, and I really promise you to speak about it as simple as possible, so that you can catch it very fast. First thing, very important, when we say sonata, it doesn't mean that this is sonata form. There are two different terms. Sonata is general, a piece of music in which we have many movements, usually 4 movements or 3 movements depending on the composer. Movements should be contrasted, there should be a contrast between them, different tempo, and it's up to the composer what kind of story and message he wants to put inside the sonata, and that's how he constructs the movements. In 95% of sonatas, the first movement of the sonata has a special kind of construction which we call a sonata form. And 95%, because some of the sonatas, and funny enough, one of most famous ones, which I will show you now, will not have the sonata form as the first movement. So it can be misleading, but that's why I'm saying it's only 5%. If we take Moonlight, sorry for the name, of course it's not the original name, but everybody knows what I'm talking about. The very famous sonata in C sharp minor by Beethoven. This is not a sonata form. Also, Mozart sonata, the famous sonata with Turkish march. Is also not a sonata form, is a variation. Because sonata form, as a kind of way of constructing the piece, just like we have variations, we have a rondo, and so on. These are exceptions. Usually, if you really want to know what is the construction, usually it is written in the tempo mark, or usually when we have sonata form, there should be allegro. The tempo should be an allegro. When you see the first movement says allegro, you can be 99% sure that it's a sonata form. Okay, but now let's focus on how it is constructed, because I don't want this video to be boring and too long. In fact, it is very simple, because there are practically 2 things that we have to be aware of. The first, very important, is that the sonata form must have 2 different themes. So the composer who wanted to compose a sonata had to create in his head 2 themes, and these themes had to be different. When the first theme was kind of like a very, very masculine, very powerful, then the second had to be more like a woman. The second theme must have what the first theme didn't have, and the contrary. This is the first thing. And the second thing, which is also very important. I think even for music lovers, but maybe this is not that important to go into details, but I think it is quite important to know, is that we have three parts of the sonata form. Just like we had, if you remember maybe from my videos, rondo, we have A, B, then A again, then C, then A, then D, and A. A is coming. So we will have also, here we have three parts, and now I'm going to talk about them. Okay, everything starts from the first theme. Sometimes the composer can decide that he wants to put a short introduction, usually, I don't know, a slow tempo introduction before a fast tempo allegro. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. It can start immediately from the theme. So you have to be alert how the composer starts the sonata. First theme can be short or can be very long. When it's very long, we call it a group of first themes. So of course it depends on the composer again. After the first theme, there is something that in English I think is called a bridge. And this is very important because this bridge has a very special task to do. In the bridge, the composer must change the key, because the second theme has to be in a different key. And there are rules for that, but I'm not going to go deeply into this. The key must always be in the specific key connected with the first theme. What is actually important for us before talking about Chopin's sonatas is one important thing. When the first theme is in minor, and in Chopin's sonatas, two sonatas, we have always the first theme in minor, because we have B flat minor and we have B minor, two sonatas. I'm talking about sonatas, of course, number 2 and 3, because my project is only focused on sonatas, on pieces by Chopin published during his life. The first sonata was not, so that's why I'm talking about sonatas number 2 and 3. Okay, when the first theme is in minor, the second theme must be in major. That's how the tradition was. Of course, sometimes we can have exception, but the composer must know it, that he is making an exception, and must know why. There must be something, some reason for that. So, first theme, the bridge, then the second theme. And then after second theme, we have something that we can call an epilogue, which is the end of the first part. The first part, big part A, we call exposition. Exposition because two themes are exposed, are being shown. When the exposition is finished, usually composer writes the sign to repeat the exposition again. So we must repeat the exposition. Why? Because it's very important, because the listener has to know very well both themes. And when we listen one time only, it's very hard to remember these melodies, these themes. So that's why this is the idea of repetition. When the exposition is repeated again, then we enter the second part. Part B, called development section. Development because in this part, the idea of this part is to develop both themes. Of course, again, it's up to the composer, because composer can decide. Maybe he can decide that I want to only develop one theme, the second I will not develop. Theme number 1 or theme number 2. He can develop both themes. He can show a little bit of one theme and the second theme. He can change a lot the keys and so on. In the development section, the composer is using his imagination and his talent. And probably in the development section, composers usually had the most fun when they composed it. Okay, then we approach the third part, which is called recapitulation. Recapitulation Recapitulation because it is practically exposition without changes, except for one. There is one very important change. The second theme will not be in the different key. The rule is that the second theme in recapitulation must be in the same tonality, in the same key that was the first theme. Is it important for music lover? You decide. What you should maybe know is that the second theme, which you in Chopin sonatas especially will be a very beautiful melody always, because it's contrasting to the first, will not be the same when it appears for the third time. Of course, provided that the pianist is repeating exposition, because this is also very important. Sometimes some pianists decide not to repeat the exposition. This you have to also be alert when you listen. Anyway, when this theme appears for the last time, after in the recapitulation, it should sound a little different, because it is in a different key. And also the bridge before it must be different, because there is no change of the key. So the composer must change the bridge. Okay, then we have exposition again, but this time it's called recapitulation. And then we have a coda. And this is the end. So it's not that hard, I think. We have three parts, and we can call it ABA or ABA prime, when in A we have two themes, in B these all are themes are changed, being changed, developed, and then we have A prime when the second theme sounds a little differently. That's all. And remember that the part A must be repeated. So, if you want, you can listen to some sonatas by Beethoven or Mozart, or some string quartets or symphonies, because in all of these pieces, usually the first movement should have this kind of structure, the sonata form. So I hope now I can proceed to start my analysis of Chopin's sonatas, believing that you will understand better the construction of the sonata form. Thank you very much, and hope to see you in my analysis of sonatas. Bye bye.